We all have a responsibility to do the work within. Whoever we are affects so many people. It affects any person we meet. Being able to experience this human life and the beauty that we see around is a privilege in itself. What do we make of that privilege? How do we show up with that responsibility of doing the inner work and of being our brother's keeper?
Welcome back. As we continue to share these stories and inspirations on this podcast, please can you co-create our beautiful future by sending the podcast out to 10 friends who may not have found it yet. If each of you do that today, it's amazing to think of how many thousands of people might discover something today that opens up something new and special for them. I am touched by these words of one of our patrons, Nadeem, who said, "Thank you, Amisha, and all the people and wisdom keepers that have been and are going to be part of this beautiful journey. Podcast after podcast episode brings timely and exponential levels of insights, wisdom, and awareness. I'm so grateful for this source and the evolution I experience because of it." Thank you to our newest patron, Sarah Anzaloni, and to all of you listening now who will soon become patrons by visiting www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community, and to those of you who will join Presence Collective, where this month we're exploring sacred activism. I sent out the video workshop earlier this month, and this week had to record an extra part as I was contemplating how judgment blocks our ability to stand in our flame of truth, and how this is key to us living a beautiful life and therefore co-creating a beautiful future. You can join us at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/courses. For anyone who is interested in going into a deep journey into self-mastery, my Sacred Leadership Program, Presence Mentoring, is open for a start in early Feb. It's a special personalized journey into clearing subconscious patterns and limiting beliefs and opening up a stronger relationship with your intuition and connection to flow. If you want to join, you can find out more at www.amisha.co.uk/leadership. This conversation reminded me of the words for this project and the act of creating a vision. You'll see why at the end of the episode. It inspired me to revisit and reshare these words and this invitation. How will you create beauty in the world? Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. The Future is Beautiful is the start of a new conversation for making that happen. Our book is an invitation for you to imagine the future of your choice and inspire us to build it with you. On our podcast, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability, so we can move out of our silos of thinking into an integrated way of being. Find your voice, speak your truth, embody your values. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. My guest today is the beautiful Swaady Martin, a serial entrepreneur, published author, certified yoga and mindfulness teacher, and a former corporate executive. In 2012, she followed her entrepreneurial aspirations and created one of Africa's most admired brands, Iswara, a socially conscious gourmet tea company contributing to the reversal of the African commodity trap and promoting Africa's rich culture. Iswara has received numerous awards and recognitions for its excellence and was the first African food brand to be retailed at the prestigious Selfridges in Harrods. A consciousness activist, Swaady launched Shift Within in 2017, a platform offering online and offline personal development courses and events to promote and support the global inner revolution, including Tunche Global Consciousness Summit, a day-long soul retreat held on sacred locations around the world. I took part in last year's Tunche in Bali, which was a beautiful and rich experience. Swaady has been passionate about African leadership since she was a teenager and participated in the setup of several organizations, including the African Leadership Network and Africa 2.0. She is a sought-after international speaker, African fashion icon, and a published author of Spiritual Tales for Children. In this conversation, we explore the question, how can we step with a clear heart into the responsibility that comes with privilege? Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I am absolutely delighted to be sitting here and welcoming you, Swaady, to The Future is Beautiful. And we find ourselves sitting in a particularly alive rice field at this moment. We purposely chose somewhere that was going to be quiet, and the world has other plans, which feels to me like a nice metaphor for where we are in humanity. And actually a lot of the things that we're talking about, often there's this sense that you have to go and find somewhere quiet to meditate, or you have to make the world like less chaotic. Whereas actually what I'm more interested in is, how do we make ourselves less chaotic whilst the world is chaotic around us? How do we find the deeper qualities and aspects of ourselves no matter what situation we're in? How do we allow what is there to be there and not be affected in a way where it takes us out of our center? And so that's the invitation for this conversation, for us and for all of our friends listening, to just welcome in the chaotic noises that may or may not be in the background.
It's very relevant what you just said, as I think as an introduction to this conversation, and just, the guiding principle of my life is how we are in the world but not of the world. It's something that comes from Christian teachings of Jesus, and I resonate very strongly with that.
Can you explain what that means to you, to be in the world but not of the world?
I think it's exactly part of what's happening now in this environment we are in, and what you described before is, how are we operating in the world? And I think we can describe the world as the noise, the materialism, the ego, the kind of for me, the world means that, all the things that are linked to the ego and the fears, and how are we operating within that framework but not being that framework. And so where do we find that inner stillness? Where do we find the love within, the peace within, the serenity within, the compassion within? And it's how are we in the world but not of the world.
And if we are not of the world, what are we of?
We're of love and compassion, and we're of divinity. We're of all these beautiful things that we are basically on the journey back to ourselves, in the context of all what is happening. And the world, we don't have to be of the world, but the world is also our teacher. And the world around is that what I call the decor, that is helping us to find, having the props and helping us to find our journey back home to ourselves, basically.
For you, you've had a life where you've lived in many different countries and you have parents of different cultures and backgrounds. And so, compared to most people I've met, you are more worldly in a different way. You're a global soul, one that has created a life and work and community in so many different places from birth. How has that been as an experience, and how has it shaped your view of what makes us similar and different as humans wherever we are, but also where we're at right now? Because I think that sometimes we can get a little bit locked into like one perspective that's the one that we're living in, but also the one that's more dominant in the media or in culture, films, music, that kind of thing that influences us.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a strong believer from a very, very young age, as a matter of fact, that you're the creator of your own life. I don't know where this wisdom came, but I had it, very early on. I just, had this one moment, and I remember very vividly where I realized, actually, Swaady, you can create any life you want. And that moment I decided to create my own life, to be very intent and very mindful, and also have accountability for the choices I made. I've never been one of blaming anyone or anything in my life. And it probably also comes from my parents, because if I think of that, they're also not people to blame any external factor on whatever is happening. So I grew up in a household where people are accountable. And I think I just inherited that, from a very young age. Why I'm saying that is I then believe that I chose everything. Again, from a very young age, I believed I chose my parents. I believed I chose my life. I believe I chose where I was born. I believed I chose everything. And I think having this perspective from and I'm talking about like 5, 6 years old, like really young, and I'm 42 now. so it actually shapes your life completely differently, because the framework and the paradigm within which you operate is already very different. I believe that I chose the diversity of my upbringing for a reason. My mom is French and Ivorian and Guinean, so from her side, I'm European and African, and my dad is African American and German, and also, from that side, I have American and European. And within my family, I literally have all continents represented and many, many countries. I don't think actually in my family anyone is married with someone from where they are. Anyway, you were so mixed that it would literally be impossible to find. But I really, really love that upbringing, and I felt that it was also a way for me to stretch my views on the world, and I saw it as actually an advantage, because I remember when I was a child, I thought about that because I could see that my friends are at school were a little bit puzzled, but where is she from? Nothing about me was just common. Everything was uncommon, and people were just a little bit puzzled. And I remember vividly thinking, Swaady, you have two choices. Either that difference can be, you can have a victim mentality. Oh, I don't fit here. I never fit anywhere. I'm so different from everyone. Or I can use it as, embrace it and see it as a strength, and see, oh, wow, actually that diversity brings something. And I chose the latter. And so I've moved in the world with that. And as I embrace it more and more, I've continued to stretch myself, integrate myself in communities that are different from me, and trying to learn more about the communities. And I'm continuously stretching that. And I think it's not that I'm thinking, oh, now I'm going to go to Asia and spend, 6 months there because, I want to learn. I think it's a very natural flow, is I'm just drawn to discovering more about the world, because I think the way I view it is that it's all facets of myself. And in a way, going on that journey of discovery is also discovering myself, because I am you and you are me, and I am, the farmer here in the rice field. It's also an aspect of me. So in stretching myself and meeting all these different people and really taking the time to, to understand their perspectives, their views, it's also understanding myself more. So I feel that I find myself more and more as I meet more and more people and more experiences. And that's what that diverse background and diverse experiences and diverse communities has brought to me and continues to bring to me.
And you spent most of your childhood in different African countries, and now a lot of your work is still based in different African countries. Can you share more about what's happening now? Because I think that that's also stories that do not get told in our world right now. And I think a lot of people have no idea of the incredibly exciting things that are forming that you're part of. And I'd love to open up that perspective.
So you mean what's happening in Africa?
Yeah, that you're part of, or that you've been, what you've seen over the years.
I think, the world media is very skewed. If you're in, the Western world, you actually don't know what's happening in Asia either. You go to China and you're like, wow, this is just a different world. And, you're basically not exposed to it unless you live there. And I believe it's true for all the parts of the world that are not Western countries. People have no clue what's going on and have this, kind of ideas that actually nothing is happening. And, it's just full on, very vibrant, very diverse places, And so, Africa is like 54 countries, depending how you count. And every country is so different. Every country has their own dynamics. They're, also part of a globalized world. So you find a lot of the same, shared cultural traits of different places. But at the same time, every country has their own history. So
how many countries have you lived in Africa?
So I lived in Liberia, in Senegal, in Côte d'Ivoire, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in South Africa. So in 6 countries. And I've traveled to a lot of African countries. I haven't traveled to all of them, but to a lot of them. And each of them is so different. So it's very difficult to say this is what's happening in Africa, because what's happening in South Africa is so different from what's happening in Nigeria or Morocco or Kenya or Côte d'Ivoire, places. But what I would say, generally is I like the sense of possibilities, the dynamism of people, the joy despite the challenges. I also like to be part of nations that are being built, and just an overall, I think, just joy, despite the challenges. When I travel outside of Africa, especially when I go to Europe, I'm like, oh wow, okay, this is oh wow, this is just so different. And so, and Asia also is the same. It's just a different feeling. Yeah, I think it's just that diversity. I think people need to just be exposed and stretch themselves and go and see for themselves what's happening, and find that actually it's much easier to travel to certain places than what maybe is thought about, and really remove all ideas. I have lots of friends visiting me in South Africa and coming with all these ideas of it's such a dangerous place and everything. Then all the experience that they have sometimes is just to reinforce those stereotypes and ideas that they had in the first place, versus being very present to the experience. So that's also, sometimes you have people traveling, but they also are not present to the place. So I would say Africa generally is just this place of contrast, I guess. Like you would find in Asia, Japan is completely different from India.
I'm curious that out of all of the countries that you travel through and that you have access to, that you've chosen to do Tunshe in Asia and in Africa. You chose Bali and South Africa. So I'm curious as to like why and what you're experiencing there. We've had conversations before around diversity and access to spiritual teachings, or the especially kind of the new like movements around spirituality, and how they're very white and they're not kind of always reaching different places. You know, I'm interested in kind of some of the innovation and the change-making work that you've been involved in. So I'm just opening space for you to share
I'm very
some experiences.
Okay. So yeah, I'm very passionate at the moment, and I mean I've been for a few years now, and I think I've been digging deeper into the concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are, and that oneness in diversity. And I think that comes also from all these experiences. And I guess I have a place of privilege to be able to push that agenda in a way. How do we celebrate our oneness in diversity? And too often, again, I'm very privileged to have lots of access to be in a lot of different places, but too often what I notice is that there is no diversity. The world, I guess, in the way it's been built, you know, and the institutions and the history, etc., and things that have been put in place have not favored diversity. So there are a lot of instances, things of influence, I would say, of global influence are very white. And if we talk more specifically about spiritual events, unless you go to a church or a temple that is linked to a specific culture and religion, of course you're going to find, you know, people. Let's say if you go to a Hindu temple, you'll have, you know, more Hindu people, and if you go to, you know, to a Christian church, you know, depending on the community, you will find people from that community, or a synagogue or a mosque, etc. So what I'm interested is, how do we create places and opportunities for people who are very different from, you know, at the surface of things, to gather and meet and actually find that place of heart meeting. And this is really what I've been passionate about. You know, one of the things I've been passionate about in the past few years, and in also setting up Tunshe, is creating those spaces where people from different religions would meet, people from different cultures would meet, people from different ages, you know, intergenerational dialogue also is important, would meet, and people from different economic background would meet. And I just felt there was a lack of such a place. And really Tunshe is about that, is about bringing people of diverse background on topics that are relevant today in terms of the well-being of humanity. More recently, I challenge my non-brown friends to really also question, you know, when they are in these places, if they see diversity. And it's not about creating reverse racism, but it's also about acknowledging that there's been a position of privilege for white people, and the institutions and, you know, what they've built is just perpetuating that. But how do you actually also recognize your oneness with other people, brown people, and just bring more diversity into those conversations? Privilege comes with responsibility. And for me, that's also something that has been a theme very early on in my life, especially growing up in Africa, where, you know, there were so many poor people, and I had access to the best schools and travel and all of that. And, you know, and my parents actually, you know, said that you do have a responsibility. And I very also early on said, you know, I didn't deserve to have all that, but it comes with a responsibility. Privilege comes with a responsibility. And so I think now we're also at a critical point in time where, you know, I think people with privilege absolutely need to realize that there is a responsibility and also a sense of sacrifice. Because sometimes to help your brother, because we're our brother's keeper, sometimes we also have to make certain sacrifices for ourselves, instead of trying to create more silos and protect what we have built for ourselves, because we don't want the other to interfere in that little illusionary paradise that we've created for ourselves. How do we break those walls and, open it for everyone? And opening for everyone doesn't mean that if you come with a good heart and say, hey, I love you, that the other person is going to respond, oh, I love you too. Because we also have to recognize that, the mechanism of the world and the history has created a lot of wounds in a lot of people. The privilege, again, comes with a kind of inner grounding and steadiness and compassion, where you're not triggered by other people's wounds, but you're still very anchored in the fact that I was born privileged, I have all these privileges, and what am I going to do to be my brother's keeper? And even if my brother is wounded, my brother is rejecting me, my brother is shouting, my brother is abusing me, but instead of, retrenching and saying, well, I came as a hero and I wanted to be the savior, and this person didn't want to be saved. The world doesn't need to be saved. The world needs to be loved. I mean, it doesn't come from me, but it is true. And that's what we need to do. And privilege comes with that responsibility to love. Coming back to Tunche, it's taking that responsibility and saying, how are we going to grow this movement and people who want to embrace to create more of that diversity. So we actually look around and we're at an event where actually the people next to me don't look like me. Yesterday I was telling someone the one thing that we do not say about Tunche is you're going to be with like-minded people. Too often one of the attraction, kind of marketing cues of events is to say, oh, come to this event, you'll meet like-minded people. No, you don't want to meet like-minded people. You actually want to be with people who don't think like you, who don't look like you. Because this is where you grow, and this is how you transcend the boundaries of separation to just find union in that difference. And this is what we're trying to create with Tunche.
And how was the event that you did in South Africa different to the one that you did in Bali?
Well, I mean, all of them are different. So now we're going on to our fourth one. And the event is not meant to be, in two locations or so. It's an event that I definitely want to grow beyond those two locations. But of course, you start with where you are and with what you have. And I think it's like with everything, because you're in certain places, and the first one was in South Africa because I've been living there for 10 years. And of course, you started, you have people who would buy into that idea. And also I thought it was important to do the first one in the cradle of humankind, to just also mark as a symbolism the birthing of that new earth we're all talking about, that diverse new earth. And then the second one in Bali was just friends saying, why don't we do one in Bali? And literally we put it together within 2 months. It's like, okay, didn't think about that. Didn't even think of doing 2 a year. The one in South Africa also just kind of emerged. So it's also a very natural process of a location also calling us. And this year we're thinking of doing it again in Bali, because the community here is asking for it. So we're just kind of discussing, okay, can we make it happen? But in 2021, we're looking at expanding to other geographies outside of Africa and Asia. So, let's see what it unfolds, how we can grow that movement. And eventually, we just, we're also not attached to something. I'm not dogmatic about anything, basically. So I'm not dogmatic about a place. I'm not dogmatic about a format. Even I'm not dogmatic about my views. The whatever even I'm sharing here, I don't think it's a universal truth. It's just my own experience of the world, and I embrace that other people would describe the world and their experience of the world completely differently, because I don't believe there is a single truth. I don't buy into that. There are as many truths as there are people.
Wow, and our truths are shifting.
Absolutely.
They don't stay the same.
Yeah. I also feel that I love those conversations because they're in the moment. I don't really like preaching anything, because I tell people, even what I'm sharing with you today, coming out of this conversation, I may have completely different ideas, because that exchange with you would have enriched me differently and would have opened my eyes to something else. So nothing that I say is ever set in stone. I'm not committed to anything I say, except the only thing, actually, I'm not committed to anything except my spiritual growth, basically. So I'm not even committed to my own ideas, because, the world may show me differently. And most of the time, the world does.
What does sacred leadership mean to you? Is it around staying open to what the world shows you?
I've been passionate about leadership my entire life, because growing up in West Africa, shattered by coups and political instability, etc., and the repercussions on the population, leadership becomes a really important topic, because you're kind of, wow, what created this mess, what created this war, and kind of the lack of leadership, or the type of leadership that you experience. So throughout my teenage years and university and beyond, I've always been involved in African leadership initiatives and reflecting on leadership, and how, because it's just so important. My views also evolved with that, kind of what I thought was leadership, what is good leadership, etc. I would say the sacred leadership is probably my latest shift of perspective on leadership, from the servant leader. And for me, these are leaders like, Martin Luther King and, Gandhi, and although Gandhi, yeah, I would say Gandhi was more like of a servant leader, and anyway, all the models of servant leaders, and for me, the servant leader is someone who has decided that certain things are the right things to do, and basically operate based on that. So it is the right thing to do to lift people out of poverty. It is the right thing to do to create safety for people, or there is a list of things that it is the right thing to do to do things for the people, etc. And so that has been kind of the prevalent model of good leadership, or the best leadership. If we think in the collective, people are admiring, is that, wow, that servant leader. There is now a step beyond that, where, and that's what I call the sacred leader, sacred leadership, is actually a leader who is in tune with the wisdom of the earth and the cosmos and everything around. So in that context, there is the right thing to do, because for me, this is still very head-based, with a heart, of course, because the heart is the compassion, the love for the people. But, it starts with a movement from the heart. I want to do good to my people, but also very quickly moves to the head. This is what I need to do. For me, the sacred leader remains between the heart and the intuition, is feeling what is around and what is the wisdom in the earth. Instead of thinking, well, to address the issue of pollution and environment damage, we need to do this, and that. We need to cut the carbon footprint. We need to remove all the plastic. For me, yes, it's good leadership, as servant leadership, but it's not sacred leadership, because I believe that there is a wisdom that is beyond thinking, and we need to tap into this wisdom. And I'll give a very concrete example. When we use paper, we at some point realize that, oh my gosh, we're now cutting all the forests with paper. So we need to come with another solution. Otherwise, we won't have forests anymore. So we created plastic. And so plastic was actually a very good idea for the environment when it came out. And then you fast forward many decades later, and plastic is actually a disaster for the environment. And now we're reverting to paper. And so servant leadership made you think that this was the solution. But sacred leadership is tapping into the earth and asking the earth, okay, what is your solution? And so that demands a development of a new sense, which is, I would say, your expertise, but that intuition. What does intuition tell you? And that intuition is that connection with the elements. And so for me, the next level of leadership is not a leader who knows the answer, is a leader who is in tune and operates based on heart and intuition, is that combination. And so I'm really passionate about that model. And this is something that, I want to spend more time exploring and finding more of those people who are doing work in the world based on that. And so we can also share more models and have this new model of operating, emerging. Because the world is just too complex. There's too much about the world that we can't even understand, and that's beyond us. And there's no mind. Our minds are so limited. How do we want to find solutions with our 5% or less of intelligence that we're using for a world that has taken more than 100% of intelligence to create? I mean, how is that possible? And so we need to disconnect from this and just really tap into our full intelligence, which is our intuition and our heart. And that's sacred leadership.
And do you see many examples of people that are very much creating and leading in the world that are coming from this place?
I don't see many examples, but I think we shift between this. There's no one that is all of one thing, but we tend to wear different hats in different situations. And so how I think also this is something Gandhi actually started with Satyagraha. It was saying, well, if we were to deal in politics with the same heart that we're dealing with our families, how does politics look like? How do I deal with my enemy if my enemy was actually someone from my family, and how do we operate? So for me is that movement of taking you from operating how you're operating in one situation, which is family, to operating, in politics like you would operate in family. And so now it's telling people, how do you operate when in your sacred space, inner or outer, and how do you take that and now apply it to politics, family, different relationships? And so that is the movement. How do we move? All of us move from that place. So I would say it's something that I'm investigating. I'm meeting a lot of people who do operate partly in that, but I haven't seen, fully like sacred leaders emerge. Someone who would go on TV and say, well, I'm fully operating from the heart or from my intuition. I think someone like Marianne Williamson, obviously is kind of the closest to that, but at the same time, at the moment, she has to talk to, a nation that is not really ready to hear that. So, I feel it's a little bit like, as a friend of mine shared with me recently, and I love what she said. How do you give people what they want so they can get what they need? So I would say that's probably where Marianne Williamson is at. But then eventually, how do you give people what they need so they get what they need? And that's the next step. I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there are quiet revolutions, and there's a difference between what somebody that's holding a political point of office or is the CEO of a big company, that the leaders that are very visible in our world, what they would be prepared to say publicly that they're doing. But I think a lot of especially CEOs talk about intuition and how they make the decisions that they make. And I guess there's a slight difference in like how much it's heart intuition and how much it's where that intuition is directed. If it's directed at what's going to make the most profit, or if it's directed at a whole body listening as part of being nature, that recognition of us as nature. I feel this is a time that we are all called to be leaders, and we are all leaders, and every parent is an obvious leader. That the importance of how a child is shaped in those early years based on who their parents are and how they behave and how they take responsibility for themselves, or how much they are in that space of their own intuitive connection. But I feel like each one of us has the opportunity. There's no excuses. Like, there's something that everyone can do to step up and lead in some way. It's like we have such influence on everyone around us, and it doesn't matter if it's through having a big social media following, or through running a company, or through being like a yoga teacher, or something like that, or even in whatever job you have. It's like, how do you show up, and how do you make other people feel around you, and what possibilities do you open in them? What I always find interesting is some people have these qualities and then others have to cultivate them.
You know, to come back to sacred leadership, I think, again, that idea of responsibility, we all have a responsibility to do the work within. It is important because whoever we are affects so many people. It affects any person we meet. Being able to experience this human life and the beauty that we see around is a privilege in itself. What do we make of that privilege? How do we show up, you know, with that responsibility of doing the inner work and of being our brother's keeper? So, you know, when we talk about people who operate from intuition, I think it depends also, as you said, within which, you know, paradigm you're operating. You know, have you done the work? I think the first thing about intuition is you need to hear it so clearly, but clearly within the sacred space that is your own body. So what are you doing to make your, you know, that place sacred? Intuition is a very tricky topic because what is, as you said, what is part of the mind, what is part of the heart, what is part of even the spirit, what is, as you said, you know, what is it directed at? The sacred leader is first and foremost, before even the intuition, first and foremost connected to the wisdom of the earth. Because that's our host. At the end of the day, you know, we walk on the earth, we eat the earth, you know, we're earth. So if we're not connected with that wisdom, you know, we're basically disconnected from ourselves. And so for me, the birthing point of our intuition is that reconnection with the earth, which then leads to a reconnection with ourselves, which then leads to a reconnection with the other. And that's the journey. And I think once you're kind of doing that, you know, journey of reconnection, then, you know, your intuition is more of a universal, grounded, tapping into the bigger wisdom that's around. And for me, that's what I feel, you know, leaders, and you're absolutely right. Everyone is a leader. Everyone is a change maker. I think we need to break down this hierarchical view of leadership. You know, sometimes you're a leader, sometimes you're a follower, sometimes, and as a matter of fact, does it really matter? Even the term sacred leadership, you know, I definitely don't see it implying as, you know, one person is above the other, because, you know, we're all, as you said, we're all leaders, we're all change makers. What are we doing in our own environment?
Well, it's an invitation. It's an invitation to oneself to see the importance of one's life.
Yep. Yeah. Very true. Very true. For you, what you know would be sacred leadership? How does that word resonate with you?
Yeah, it's It's I find all the language and the terms like that are constantly emerging and redefining quite interesting. And I find the journey you can kind of feel through time, I guess, as we're moving into different paradigms, how these different aspects of language come in, and what was authentic leadership becomes sacred leadership, and actually the what's behind it is the same. For me, whatever terms we use, whether it's sacred, whether it's authentic, whether it's even just leadership, it's really, to me, like, what is it to be a human, and to acknowledge what it is that you have been given or you have chosen. What situation did you arrive into in this life, and what privilege did that give you? What perspective did that give you? What responsibility did you come in with? And how can you alchemize all of that to really make your life a gift? And for me, it's not something that means, you step into this path of sacred leadership and then suddenly, like, everything you do is perfect. And you are, that you always have a smile on your face, and you're always kind, and you always make the right decisions, and and that you have huge impact on millions of lives, or whatever it is. It's more about that acknowledgement of your own worth. And it speaks to me of, like, actually the origins of this project, which was around this notion of what each one of us does is what's shaping our future. And it's how we spend our time, money, and energy. It's what we're thinking about. It's the choices that we make. It's what we choose to say. It's how we choose to interact with someone. It's how we look at what's possible within our own lives, and we choose what to create. And one thing that struck me when I started this whole thing a decade ago was that so many people, and in this I include sometimes myself, feel that you just get on with life, you respond to life, it's almost like it's fixed, and you have to, you're just here, and you show up and you do your thing. And I never really thought like that. Now the rain has come.
Beautiful, we're being blessed.
Really bringing this, like, heavy rain into our soundscape and here onto the land. What is it that needs to happen for somebody that maybe, like, you didn't know when they were 5, or knew, but then the other voices were so loud that those things got pushed down, or there was never any support or recognition or acknowledgement or reinforcement around that sense, of oneself? And so what is that journey that somebody needs to go on in order to reclaim that sovereignty, in order to really connect with a divine purpose, with a mission, with a sense of some kind of importance of being here? And it's really interesting, because I feel like there's also at this time so much talk about narcissism and arrogance and self-obsession, and it's like there's a maybe a fine line even. It's like we have to find that place where, of course, like, there's humility, but before you get to humility, you have to, like, realize that you matter, and that you you are here for something, and that you have this beautiful opportunity to be a doorway into so much for so many people, and that there's so much possibility there. So I think for me, it's part of it is this invitation into worth, and this invitation into possibility, and this invitation to look around and see like what can be made more beautiful, and then take that initiative, and an invitation to go deep into a journey of knowing oneself. And that is a ride for everyone, and it's a messy one. And there's so much power in the shadow, and so it's an invitation to go deeper into those parts that we've shut out, and an invitation to go deeper into those parts that feel so alive. Like, I think that the divine in us can be very scary for many people as well. So for me, sacred leadership is about being on a path of embodying all of that, and it being a path that is not finished until you die, perhaps beyond. and so it's not about like a set of hacks of like, or a set of things that you say or postures that you make. It's a very, very dynamic process where you're constantly learning and evolving. And for sure, it has rootings in the earth. And I loved what you were saying earlier. And when you were saying it, I could see this tapestry of how when one of us comes into that place of connection with ourselves, with the divine of ourselves, and with the rottenness of ourselves, and then we connect that to the earth and to the cosmos, and we open that space of our hearts and our intuitive fields, and then we start connecting with more and more people. It's like we're creating this beautiful, beautiful tapestry. And then the information gets louder and it gets stronger, because it's not coming from that I, me, like it's that comes from the we place, and that it's integrated into a place that isn't, how will this serve me? Or even like, this is my idea of how I'm going to impact humanity, or I'm going to save something or change something, and I'm just going to go gung-ho on this plan. It's like that openness to keep listening, to keep receiving new bits of information, to keep checking in, like, does this still feel right? Is this still what is being asked for? Does this still make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with what you say. For me, it really comes back to that, to the world doesn't need to be saved. The world needs to be loved, and love will save the world. And so for us to love, we have to do that work within, and with everything that you shared. You were asking me, how do you, to give, maybe some insights on, if you didn't have this kind of realization very early on, what can you do today on the path? The first thing is to question, and I think is questioning the conditioning. If I look at my own journey, my parents are definitely non-traditional people, and each of them very different, and kind of outliers of society. And that has served me well, because I'm very different from them, and they chose their own model and their own vision of the world. But I felt that I took that cue, I explored it even deeper. And so it's just, kind of getting into yourself and looking at, this house you're in. And when I talk about the house, is the whole world, your belief systems, what is it that you believe? How do you see the world? and kind of going after each one of them. Do I believe that because really it's what inside of me I believe, or I believe it because TV or society or culture or whatever has pushed those ideas on me? And I think once you start first, you have to start from scratch, because what happens is in a lot of times we find ourselves in a house that has already been built, but has been built with unconsciousness. Everything that's unconscious that we use, the friends we have, the routines, the rituals, the beliefs, etc., is all things from our unconsciousness that we just kind of tagged along and just put in to build our house. And then we're looking at this house. Yeah, it's comfortable because it's things that we know. But is it the house that you would have built yourself if you didn't have any of those? And I think it starts with that. What is the house that you would build if you were not born in Africa, from, mixed race people, from people with that experience and those beliefs and those, all of that? What is the house that you would build? And I think it has to start with that, is deconditioning yourself to actually go back to the essence of you, who you are, and live after your own terms and question everything, like deep, and things that even we take for granted. I was saying earlier, things where we say, well, it's not acceptable that people are poor materially. Okay, because that's a belief of the world. Is this really what I believe? Does it make sense? Is this what, so I'm not saying that there is an answer. Everyone has to find the answer for themselves, but you need to question everything that is fed. So
But is that even a belief that we have in the world? Because if it really was a belief, wouldn't we have found a way to create more equality?
Well, it doesn't matter what the world is doing. I think it has to start, in this process, the journey starts within. It's what is it that you believe? Because, I may believe that, everyone, there shouldn't be any poverty in the world. That's my belief. I don't know what the world is believing, but that's my belief. And there is a part of the world that is believing that. And, I've just taken that belief without questioning it. So now, okay, that belief, let's question it. And let's go deep into that to find, what is that answer for me? It's questioning, ideas of success. What is success for me? It's questioning relationships. What is a relationship? What is marriage? These things that are the big building blocks of our lives. What is, my beliefs around food, and around health and around, so those big building blocks, we actually have to break them and start them from scratch. Like, imagine you're just arriving on Earth and you don't know anything, and you haven't spoken to anyone, and you don't know, and having that discipline to go and search. And it's not a process that takes 2 minutes. This is a process that takes years and a lifetime. But that's really an important process to do, because there's so many ideas that are here in the world, the concept of inner child, of wounds, of all of that. These are concepts that are just there. Do I buy into that? One of the things that I invite people to question is the ideas of what a father and a mother should be. Because, right now, you speak with a lot of people is, this is one from my childhood, I have daddy's issues, I have this and that. But, these are even concepts that we've created, because there is an idea already that has been put in our head of, this is what a good father is, this is what a good mother is. And so we come with these ideas that actually, where do they come from? And then we measure our life based on those ideas and say, well, actually my woundedness comes because I didn't have this type of father, or I didn't have this type of mother. But where do this concept of mother and father come from?
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
I mean, totally see what you mean.
Yeah.
And as you know, this is the work that I do with people. But it's what's firing up that's kind of interesting is that, because so many of the therapeutic processes that we have are attached to so many of these old paradigm belief systems. And I know in my own personal experience, and I've watched many people go through it, is that you go to, a traditional therapist, or you go and do things in order to heal and in order to come into more fullness. And then you actually get sent down rabbit holes of deeper aspects of victimhood or deeper senses of your brokenness or deeper limitations. And you come out of years of therapy saying, well, I'm not designed for relationships and it's because of my upbringing. Or I will never be able to do this because my mother did this when I was young. And this is, I've now worked with it with my therapist. I understand it. And so what we're talking about is something that actually is on a different paradigm where everything is rewirable and it's not stories that need to be attached to.
Absolutely. I think our worst enemies is the stories we create in our head. And so, of course, it's good to be exposed, as we discussed earlier, to different ideas. But I think it's dangerous to buy into any idea as a truth that doesn't come from yourself. And you described it perfectly, is that, now you're going to a therapist with ideas of your wounds come from, your childhood or so, but, maybe not. Life, this idea, I think there is one thing, this idea that there is a perfect life is actually a marketing idea. And so there is no perfect life, there is no perfect parent, there is no perfect mother. And actually, what is even perfection? That concept of perfection is a fully manufactured idea. And so to come back on to your question of how do we go on this journey, the first thing is to question everything and stop buying into all these things. Yes, you can tap into the knowledge that is available, but we have to stop grabbing these ideas and following, I find like we're almost following like sheep's one movement. So right now is the movement of this, of the healing the divide between the divine feminine and masculine, but these are all also concepts. It's all concept. And then we're buying into one concept after the other. So the first thing is just deconditioning. That is probably the most important thing you can do for yourself, the most empowering thing that you can do for yourself, because once you've released yourself of all these stories and ideas that are actually, as you said, breeding victimhood, breeding, false ideas. And maybe that's also your journey, and it's fine because we're here on a journey. Maybe you need to go through that process too on your journey. But I find it is empowering just to decondition ourselves. Once we decondition ourselves, we just, try to, it's like basically as you shower every day, and cleanse yourself. It's like constantly cleansing ourselves of these conditioned ideas that are pushed on ourselves and having the discipline. So the second thing for me is discipline. We need to have, I find that spiritual discipline is of utmost importance. And you can remove the spiritual if you want and keep discipline, because there are certain, I would say, guiding principles of one life, and everyone can choose their own, that we need to be disciplined about. And of course, as you said, again, it's not going to be perfect because we're on a journey and we're not going to do the perfect thing all the time, but we still need to have that discipline. It's like athletes, so if you want to become an athlete of love, you have to practice love. And each time, you sway, you kind of come back to it. And the more you do it, the quicker you come back to it, until at some point it becomes your modus operandi, and that you're back to your essence. And that's the first thing that you do. And so it's the next thing is those guiding principles. So principles, if being happy is important for you, so that should be a guiding principle. So when you're in a situation where you're finding yourself, having that mindfulness of feeling, oh, wow, in this moment I'm feeling really unhappy, it's kind of not dwelling into the unhappiness that you're feeling, but, how are you getting out of it, and having also those humanly mechanisms or situations or rituals or so that help you get out of it. Yeah, so I would say, for me, it's those three things, as maybe insights that I can share for my own journey. It doesn't work for everyone. Everyone has their own process. But for me, what I find is, one, the deconditioning is important. The second is, the set of values by which you operate, and, question those regularly and maybe narrow them down. For me, I just narrowed it to, one thing, which is compassion. And love, I guess, which is kind of compassion. Love, compassion is love. So I narrowed it down to that. And then the third one is just having that discipline. to come back to your operating principle or principles, and also of shaking yourself off the conditioning that you acquire along the way. And this is also, it's for me, I find it important not to be part of just one community, because with being part of a community, you start to adopt, the principles, the beliefs and all of that community, and you think that, okay, this is my world. But by moving to different communities and being part of different communities, you're actually not, adopting just one way of thinking, and you're remaining open.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you, so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty. What I was also saying is it's not like therapy is wrong, and it can be really helpful at different stages, but that often we give our power away when we go into a space of healing, and then in that space our ability to heal gets diminished, and that we also can become victim to outdated systems or to fads that are passing through, and that a lot of what is out there is operating in a hierarchical power over dynamic, and it's very hard to come into a place of one's sovereignty within that system.
Sure.
And that's where the constant deconditioning is necessary. And with people, when I work one-to-one with people, it's very much like it's a practice that over time they're learning how to do themselves. And I feel like I'm just there pointing out some of the things, and everything has to resonate fully for there to be like a proceeding. The effects of the work only stay with the person if they then go away and integrate it, and I show them how to. And so it kind of creates that sense of the responsibility, and the anchoring is always on the person in order to make those shifts of deconditioning themselves, because other people can only be guides and hold up mirrors and introduce different tools or ways of looking at something. And I feel like there's so much of that in the along the path, and that becomes another aspect of the discernment needed to be in a place of sacred leadership. That there's an openness. It's a quite a tricky balance, a tricky kind of tightrope of like being open to everything, so that there's always this constant possibility of learning something, of seeing something from a different perspective, of expansion, of just completely rethinking something, and then the discernment that you don't lose yourself somehow in that process.
True.
And it's a lifelong art.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, it's coming back to a theme that I think by now all the listeners understand is important for me, is that sense of responsibility. I think there's also responsibility for all of the therapists, the healers, the people who are, kind of helping people along their journey, there is a fine line with manipulation, because I find a lot of times, because we live in a world which is based on material, and where everything has to become a commercial activity, and people need to, obviously have their needs. How do you provide that support without manipulating people into, wanting them to sign up to your retreat, your treatment, your this and that, because of the commercial aspect of it versus, what is it that they actually need? And I think, right now also, because obviously we've hit a wall where so many people are lost, and are looking for a way out, and to find, so on the other side, the whole industry of, someone called it anxiety consumerism, is booming, and how there is a certain integrity that is kept there. And I think it's going back to the role, of how almost more traditional societies were organized, where everyone had a little bit of their role, and there was always a healer, or the person, yes, was here to be the brother's keeper in terms of their inner well-being. And so I think there is that fine balance of being there to support the inner well-being of people, but at the same time not manipulating people in believing that we're going to give them the medicine that's going to cure them of their inner and as you of their inner anxiety or lack of well-being. And I think it comes to what you said just now, how you just kind of provide tools and accompany people on their journey, but for not them to become dependent on that, because they have to find their own. I think everyone has to find their own. So the other thing, I would just also invite, I would say, my brothers and sisters on this path, this growing path of healing people and being there, is also just to be aware of the manipulation that comes with wanting, commercial success. Because I see right now, too much, and you see it in other spiritual paths. This, I call it the abundance preaching. If you do this, you're going to attract abundance. How do you move from $100 in your bank account to $1 million, and come, you'll do this abundance workshop. It is again that idea that there is a perfect something, that a perfect model that anyone needs to achieve. And I think this is also something that people need to question, because if we move from the capitalistic, we're basically now applying capitalistic principles to the spiritual world. How, it's basically the same paradigm. We're not getting out of a certain conditioning where, the model is such. So, we need to question all of this. We need to question even the idea of what abundance looks like. And I think that's the first thing to question. One of the first things to question, because it is at the root cause of many issues in the world today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I feel like there's this relationship that I hadn't exactly articulated that's come alive through this conversation, of the individual limiting beliefs that we have, and then what's happening on a bigger scale. And so when you were talking about poverty, for example, and you were saying, we have a belief that people shouldn't live in poverty, but then I feel like there are enough people that believe that actually it's okay, and we all do, and because we accept it, because we walk past a homeless person, probably most of us, every day, and become numb to it. And I just got really oh, how cool would it be to gather many, many people and do that deconditioning work on the big ideas that affect our collective humanity. And if we turned that belief, it's okay that people live in poverty to no one gets left behind, you know?
But what is poverty? That's also, before we even answer that, and this is where the bigger question comes, I experience poverty on a daily basis. And this is one of the reasons also I love living in Africa, because I find, and generally in emerging markets and even here in Asia, although, in Bali, you don't see it so much because of the structure of the community, especially in Ubud. I remember when I was living in Paris, at some point I was like, I just can't live here because I just feel I'm disconnected to what's happening in the world. And, I want to be in a place where I see poverty every day in front of me, because that's the reality of the world. The majority of the world is poor materially. So I wanted to be confronted to material poverty on a daily basis, because I think that makes you question. And my own answer to that, and in operating at factory where most of my workers came from the townships, and actually I just realized that I don't even like seeing my workers like I own them. I say the people who were working in the factory, they're not my people nor my team. I don't own them. And I experienced poverty very differently, because at first I thought, okay, to try, the first thing I have to do is work with in my own background, the people I work with, how do we lift them out of material poverty? And what I experience is that I lift them out of material poverty, but it didn't solve their material poverty issue. It actually exacerbated them. And the more they were making, the more money issues they had, and the more, because they had then taken on more, things on their end. And, I sat and I was like, wow, and some of them, just kind of didn't take some of the opportunities that were given to them. And I then question is like, okay, so actually, there is something deeper. And that's my response. The response I find for myself is that there is actually human poverty. And that is the real issue, because you can give how much money to a person who's poor materially, opportunities, and a lot of times you'll hear stories, and it was just not my story, but it's in a lot of times, it's the story of these people who were not able to live themselves out of the material poverty, even though they were giving the opportunities, even though they were giving the money, because the deeper issue is the human poverty. And so the human poverty is everywhere. It's a scarcity mentality. It doesn't matter if you have $1 in your bank account or $1 billion in your bank account. If you have scarcity mentality, you're the same. And that scarcity mentality comes from somewhere. So we can go, this just one issue of poverty, and this is just to give an example of how we deconstruct these beliefs that we have, is that we have to go deep, 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 and find for ourselves what is my answer, and be able to have not a fixed answer, because that answer is something. There are those big questions, at least I see from myself. I have those big questions on the world and on my life, and it's almost the walls of the house, but those walls are moving. So each time they're there, so I get to an answer, and so there is a wall, but then they're constantly. It's like a bamboo open air house, and also the color of the walls, you're just going to change them all the time as you get confronted to more life and more people and more situations. But for me, my mindfulness of the moment is on obviously my inner self, but also on those big questions. So when I go out there, even having a conversation with you, because our mind are, we're multitaskers. So as we're talking, my walls are also listening and saying, okay, is there new information that, we're grabbing? And so maybe that needs to change the wall. And so it's all these big questions. They're constantly confronted. The moment I step out into the world, these questions are there, and they're ready to receive new answers and to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. They're not fixed. It's a moving house.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I'm giving you a virtual hug. Otherwise, we're going to mess up the microphones here. So this was a hug moment.
Well, we can embrace everyone that's listening in our hug.
Yeah. This was the group hug moment. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm just feeling.
Yeah, I hope you guys are feeling the love that is just coming out of Amisha. I'm very lucky. I'm like in front of her. But I think it's so strong. You'll feel it through the podcast. You'll be like, whoa. Yeah, it's happening. I'm feeling it. Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much.
It just got a lot more sweaty in
it. Yeah, love tank right there in front of me. Thank you. Wow.
I feel like we've covered the core of what we both believe it is to be a human at this time, and what this beautiful invitation is that we all have.
And thank you. I have to say, long before I met Amisha, I was somewhere and I saw your little flyer. And it must have been maybe a year or 2 years before I met you. And I took it and I carried it with me for so long. And I never actually, I never thought of reaching out, but I was like, wow, whoever is doing this, I just love her vision on life and what she wrote, and I actually carried it with me every day in my diary.
Wow.
Every day. A little card and what was written on it.
Wow.
Because it was just so, it's, one of those, you're in a shop and then you see that little flyer and you're just like, wow, what is that? And then I just took it, and then I never Googled you, nothing. I just carried that card around with me. So probably 2 years before you actually sent a message.
That's wonderful. And actually it was Anna Gret, a folderback who's been on this show and is an old friend of mine from the sustainable fashion days, and she said we needed to meet.
And that was incredible. So when she did the connection, and later on, then I went and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the lady from the card I've been carrying with me every day for the past 2 years. And often, I would just open literally my diary, my daily. So I would see it every day and I would just read. And each time I was like, wow.
Wow.
So, it works in incredible ways. And then, I was like, actually, this person exists. And that moment I thought, I wonder why I never reached out to you, when I had been carrying this all along. But I think, this is the power of something you put out in the world. And actually, you don't even need to meet that person, but something there just resonated so strongly and was kind of a daily, sunshine, just reading that. And wow, it's like, wow, every day.
Gosh, that's so, I don't even know what to say.
So thank you.
Thank you. It's funny because, doing this and then working through the conditioning that I have, I kind of go through phases with it. And sometimes I feel like with making flyers, it's one of those things that I hate. And like, especially with putting like a picture on a flyer, and then putting them out. I put a few, not very many, in Sayuri. So that's probably where it came to you through. And I sometimes have this feeling that it's like, how can I explain? That I'm adding to like the noise and the potential recycling or landfill or the, this kind of, because of the capitalism, it's like promotion. Yeah. And of course, the deeper intention that always existed behind any of this was creating spaces, you know, for inspiration and my own desire to live a life where I'm constantly inspired and that I'm constantly touching the realness of humanity that is moving us in beautiful directions. And then to hear that you know, that
because your flyer was not like promoting yourself. I think for me what I liked is the write-up, because that for me was inspiration. Is that vision. You basically wrote on that little card, your vision of the future is beautiful, and beauty in the world, importance of beauty in the world. And for me, this is why I didn't even think about even going to your website or anything. I just liked what you wrote. And, you know, and I think these words, you know, words, as we know, are energy. And then you're just putting out there that, you know, it was not like, you know, if you have this issue and problem, reach Amisha. It was just like, you know, this is my vision of the world I'm putting out there. And then I'm just putting there. And indeed, you know, you're kind of, wow, okay, I love this vision of the world. I actually want to keep it and read it every day, you know. And so that's actually powerful. And then we found our way to each other at the, you know, when the time was right. And there was no need to, you know, kind of Google or anything. It's just that, you know, I think probably the intention was there because I was reading it every day and seeing it every day.
I also think of this podcast or whatever it is as a very like alive being that is a network of the keepers and of this beauty, you know, the ones that are wanting to see and move and create more of this beauty that we speak of. And I feel that it's alive, and so often then that's what happens, that it works in mysterious ways and brings everyone together into this place.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
It's time to let you go to India.
Yeah. And, you know, meet us at Tunche if you resonate with all these ideas that we're sharing. You know, it is a co-creation, and we're just trying to gather as many people who just want to bring their own contribution. You don't need to buy into anything. You just need to be you, and the more diverse, you know, the better, because that's what the world is made of. So yeah. If you don't want to meet like-minded people, you know, there is a space.
Yeah, but I have to say, I met like-hearted people. So it wasn't a space that was awkward to be in.
Yeah.
It was a space that's very inviting to be in.
Yeah.
Thank you for creating those spaces.
We thank you for co-creating this, you know, this, as you said, we're all like a little, you know, piece of that tapestry. And so nothing is possible without one another. And the more we bring those spaces, maybe the more we also expand it, you know. And new things emerge, you know, new ideas, new formats, you know, they shape, and like water. Anyway, we're made of water, so, you know, that's the reality. Everything is water, so everything should be moving and flowing in a way, or not. You know, even that is a dogma.
Yeah, everything should be moving and flowing until it stops.
Exactly. So actually, we don't need any certainty. Yeah. And again, even that is a dogma. You know, it's kind of. You know, do we need to have set ideas on anything?
Well, I feel like that is the calling of this moment. There was a time when like spirituality kind of had more of a rigidity about it, and it was kind of about controlling experience. And I feel like with where the world is moving and where consciousness is moving and how much unknown there is in the future, that what we're being called to is to come into such comfort with the unknown. And it's not an easy or comfortable ride.
Well, the only thing
But
that
it's
we
fun.
I guess the only thing that we know is that the future is beautiful.
If we allow ourselves to see it that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you share how you'd like to be found? We're going to post links to everything that you've mentioned.
Yeah, people can find me on Instagram, Swaady Martin, SWAADY_Martin. And then from there, you have access to all of my different social media.
Yeah, and you have swaady.com.
Yes, I have swaady.com, and then, all the various initiatives and co-creations are also available from that swaady.com.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Amisha.
Thank you.
Bless you.
And you.
And bless you guys who are listening.
It's all for you. And also for us. And the earth.
Yeah.
And the future.
Yeah.
And the beauty.
Yes. Yes. We love beauty. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?